Welcome to the Green Hour here on FM91. Previous episodes of Green Hour up right now, so make sure you go ahead and check the previous episodes. Our next episode, which is this episode, the one you're watching right now on the Green Hour on YouTube. Make sure you subscribe to our YouTube channel, that is FM91. Two special guests joining us this morning. We have Maheen Rehman, appointed CEO Infrazam in Pakistan 2021, has played a crucial part in setting up Infrazam in Pakistan's base operations and its initial structure, with over 20 years of experience in investment banking, research and asset management. Also joining us this morning is Chairman Infrazam Board Khoo Hock, who has helmed various portfolios in the financial sector in a career that spans almost 30 years in rating corporate project securitization and structured finance boards, as well as project finance consultancy and private equity. Joining us this morning, Maheen Rehman and Khoo Hock. Welcome to the show. Welcome to the Green Hour.
Thank you so much, and it's great to be here.
Hock, thanks for coming.
Good morning.
Good to have you.
Great to be here.
I wanted to start from really a base of curiosity and talk about Infrazam. What is Infrazam and what do you do exactly?
So actually, you can find out what we are by just looking at our name. So we have infra, which is for infrastructure, and we have zamin, which actually means assurity or guarantee. And our purpose here is to guarantee infrastructure. And how we do that is, if you look around Pakistan, what's the biggest issues we have? We have problems with our roads, we have problems with water, with sanitation, with all the big sort of infrastructure that you see we are lacking and we are behind. And so our purpose at Infrazamin is to kind of help raise the financing and the support needed to build that infrastructure. Right. And we do it by effectively guaranteeing those projects. And for us, it's about evaluating the project, seeing, is it feasible, is it viable, can we absorb the risks? And if we do that, then banks and other sort of investors that want to come into these projects can use our guarantee as a backstop for their risk. And so what that does, it just helps infrastructure projects get financed and build the type of cities and the type of environment that we need in Pakistan to move forward into the next generation.
I'd like to talk about the process. Before I do, Hock, infrastructure is a word that's used very sort of, I feel, loosely, and we talk about green infrastructure and infrastructure that Maheen is talking about. Could you again sort of, in your terms, define infrastructure?
Yes, different institutions define infrastructure differently and purely because of focus, right? But for me, if you consider the challenges that we all face on this planet Earth, we should start with the foundations of defining it broadly. And for that, I would say anything that is used by the public for public good. And
so infrastructure, anything used by the public for the public good. Okay. Well, I get who decides that, and how do you know if it's for public good or not?
Yeah, so from that, we then channel down to the specific streams, right? You have physical infrastructure, which is, quite traditional, roads, bridges, where everyone uses for their convenience to get to work, for business. We also have social infrastructure, where we need hospitals and schools, right? And the pandemic has shown us that the need for hospitals and healthcare is tremendous. Yeah. There's also other forms of infrastructure with respect to climate change, right? Where they now fall into two categories. One, mitigation, where we're trying to reduce carbon emissions and greenhouse gas emissions, projects to do that. We also have projects that are classified as adaptation projects, where the focus is actually to protect the vulnerable from the effects of climate change. And we've seen that here in Pakistan a few months ago with the droughts that we've had, and more recently the rainfall that we've seen in Karachi in the past weeks. So those are all kinds of infrastructure, and maybe just to extend what we refer to as green infrastructure, which is additional complications, we could also involve waste management, which not necessarily is related to climate change and greenhouse gas emissions. It's just related to other forms of human behavior, plastics going into the rivers and to the seas. Those could also come as part of green infrastructure, where we need to make sure we have sustainable activities and sustainable facilities to ensure we don't overpollute.
There was a very interesting article I was reading, Hock, I think, where you had stated that if we look at Asia and perhaps the crisis that it's in, there's something about grandma's savings as the answer to our problems. Do you remember that article?
Yes.
Could you perhaps elaborate on that?
Yes. So I wrote that in the context of encouraging governments to put aside some of the savings from the younger population, so that these are then channeled towards investments in infrastructure. Today, most governments just tax, and when you tax, you take away a portion of incomes, and then it's gone forever. But I'd rather tax a little bit, but put aside a little bit more, where these are then channeled to investing in infrastructure, and when the young become grandma and grandpas, 30, 40, 50 years from now, the returns from those investments help with their own longevity and their retirement needs.
This is the Green Hour on FM91. We're talking to CEO of InfraZamin, Maheen Rehman, and Chairman InfraZamin, Khoo Hock. As we talk about infrastructure, we talk about green infrastructure this morning. Maheen, on the website, there's a whole list or 10 different areas of infrastructure. I want to list them out. So renewables, energy, everything, digital, water and sewage, recycling, financial guarantees, transport, housing, oil and gas, and it sounds like the kind of stuff that we could rebuild cities.
Yes, and our sectors are meant to cover all the areas that a developing country needs in order to make their cities world class and sustainable. Right now, we touched upon this before, but what's the main issue, right? What's the main problem here? Is it that we don't know how to do these projects, or is it that we don't understand the technology? No. These projects are very basic and very simple, and this is what Pakistan needs. It needs roads, it needs energy, it needs hospitals, it needs schools, to build the basic building blocks of how, as people, we should be progressing towards and living towards. The issue for us comes in, where do we find the money to do this? Right? And you look at today's economic crisis, we are going from pillar to post, trying to get an IMF deal in place, trying to find, friendly governments to support us. But the reality is, we have the funds we need right here in Pakistan. It's just that as institutions, there are too many risk parameters that we are not used to dealing with. Now, every new project, you build a building, a green building, for an example, a building which is energy efficient. It is not understanding how the tech works on that. It is actually understanding who's going to fund it. How do the cash flows work? Is there a risk in doing it? What are the risks? And I think it's that we get stuck, because the financing is available here locally. Local banks have tremendous capital available to them. Even if we look at the capital markets, if we look at the bond markets, there is enough funds sitting there to actually fund Pakistan's infrastructure needs. And if we did this right, then we wouldn't need to run around looking for the IMF or looking for other investments that we then have to bend over backwards here for. Right? So with the kind of solution that we provide, which is really, we guarantee credit risk, which is the main problem, if you like, of financing these things, we're taking a lot of the risk off the table as InfraZamin, right? And then we are enabling that infrastructure to then be financed and then to happen locally, without needing a foreign institution to come and support us on this. And ultimately, isn't that the kind of journey that we want to go on in Pakistan and be self-reliant? Rather than constantly seeking outside funds and then having all these conditionalities attached to them.
So I heard you say that we've got all the funding available right here in Pakistan.
Correct.
Without having to go anywhere.
Correct.
And so what it feels like is that we've just made something very simple very complicated.
Correct.
And how do I be nice about it? We just mess things up. without really having to, I mean, is it a priority issue, Hock? I mean, with Maheen, what is...
No, I don't think it's a priority issue. We know we have to do this, and a
we're
lot
not
of this,
doing it.
but we're not doing it. Why? Because let's take a very simple example. We just did a transaction recently, which involves digital infrastructure, which is what
We want to talk about that too,
fiber
yeah.
optic cables, tower fiberization, digital access, data rooms. All these things, data centers, to be set up to enhance digital access.
Yep.
Right? And why wasn't this transaction happening earlier? Because the company kept going to the bank, and the bank kept saying, we cannot assess this. We are bound by our own risk constraints, and we cannot accept this kind of transactions risk. So we went in as Infrazamin and we said, okay, we will assess the risks. If we can understand the risks, then please, as a bank, lend against us. Use us as your collateral rather than the company. Right. And so hence that financing happened, and that was a $10 million financing for digital infrastructure.
We can name the organization. For Multinet.
It was for Multinet, yes. So what that does is it doubles their capacity to provide digital infrastructure and hence digital access, broadband access, internet access to second tier, third tier cities of Pakistan, to the SME segment, to small businesses, etc. Right? And that's what we need to be building. But what had been the roadblock in this situation is just that the bank's risk parameters did not fit that project.
Hock, do you see that as a major challenge, or is it a major opportunity where the banks just don't know what to do and it comes in into
Traditionally, lending has been quite simple. Give me the collateral and I'll give you the money, right? But as we move towards more complex businesses like Multinet providing internet access and all, the collaterals are fiber optic networks, right?
Correct.
Which is difficult to evaluate and very, very unconventional. But businesses like them need funding as well. So a different approach to evaluating their credit risk need to be applied. And we've done a lot of work there, and we've gotten comfortable with them and happy to provide the guarantee to facilitate financing.
Since this transaction has come through with Multinet, was to the tune of $10 million, has that opened up other avenues, and have other companies sort of, hold on, wait, we can access this? I mean, how has that furthered your objective, perhaps, as Infrazamin?
Well, we've had a tremendous amount of response. It's often people wait to see the first transaction, and now the first transaction around, and we've made it very clear we're looking for a variety of opportunities to support, not just one particular sector, because infrastructure requirements here in Pakistan are huge. So we really need to be able to service as many people as possible, and we're looking forward to do a lot more in the coming months.
In one of your interviews, it said that one of you compared the subcontinent, and there was a concern maybe from investors that the capital wasn't used for capital formation. Could you explain that? Which basically in my mind says, there's a big risk. Which says to me, the money that I'm going to invest, is that actually going to be used for what it said it's going to be used for?
I think Pakistan, we have just lifting from that. We have a different problem. Our business concepts and our entire sort of framework is set upon a very different structure, which is rent seeking, right? So what does that effectively mean? It means that if a business makes money and produces, for example, let's take a textile company. I just use that as an example. I'm not saying they do it. But you take a textile company, it produces textiles, it exports to the world, right? Fantastic. That's what we need. We need more textile exporters. We need more exporters, full stop. But what we find very often is that the money that textile company makes should be reinvested into the business to become bigger, to achieve scale. Instead, we find them moving towards non-productive assets, for example, towards real estate. And for us, that's rent seeking, because the capital that has been formed through that business is now being taken out of that business and put into land or buildings or real estate, which is not as productive as, for example, building an export sector, right? So we are not using our own savings to reinvest in ourselves. We are using our savings to invest in rent-seeking areas, which is real estate, rental income. So we become used to that kind of cycle. What do banks do? Banks raise deposits from the general public,
right?
And they invest the vast majority of those deposits into government securities. Because today, the interest rates are at 15.5% on government securities. It is effectively risk-free return for them. Again, a type of rent seeking. In reality, what are banks supposed to do? Financial intermediation. Right? So they're supposed to take your money, my money, and they're supposed to give it to people who want to put up projects and who want to build something. So that's called capital formation, right? The more a country invests in itself, in capital formation, whether it is plant, machinery, infrastructure, buildings, and most of all its own people, the more it can develop and progress and grow. What we have done is that we've created a system whereby a lot of those funds are just going towards non-productive areas.
Right.
So it's not like we don't have the money. I assure you the funds are there.
Wow.
They're just not being channeled to the right areas of productive asset, which is what we want to see. You hear a lot of economists talk about we should increase our productivity, we should increase our education, we need to increase our labor force. Well, those are all investments that we need to make in ourselves. And investments that only when you set up those kind of industries and those kind of projects here will your own people be trained and hence become more productive and understanding of how that will work. So I think that's where we
just hearing you is Abu Hock, how this is a huge challenge, I'd imagine, for InfraZamin. But with your experience across Asia, we often talk about lists. We have the grey list has made it to this list, and Pakistan has made it to that list. And as a layman who has an interest in the economics of Pakistan and where we're headed as an economy, how do you see things? Slightly unfair question, but how do you see things panning out right now with investment and with capital formation and use of that capital, etc.?
Well, I think it's very important to go back to the basics, right? And when you look at what you need to do and what we need to do for Pakistan, it's actually quite simple. Get our standards up to apply to financing, right? Because I believe financing is the greatest agent of change, right? Maheen talked about all these new approaches in financing. We just add to that a green lens. Imagine if you just add to that a green lens, and this is throughout the system. Imagine every bank says we adopt these green principles, so that if any borrower who wants financing will have to adapt and adopt these standards.
Correct, right.
There won't be an opportunity to say, okay, go to another place, right? If you go everywhere, everybody's asking for these standards. Imagine the kind of change we can deliver to Pakistan immediately, right? So the financing is the greatest agent of change. We make sure corporates, if you want to borrow, just don't give me the collateral, because I want to see what you're going to do with my proceeds. And then we want to make sure you do it, you deploy it responsibly to the planet and to the people.
We're talking green infrastructure. Our guests this morning, CEO InfraZamin Maheen Rehman and Khoo Hock, Chairman InfraZamin Board. Just before the break, we touched on financing and funding and capital formation and using investments for what they're meant to be used for. I do want to talk about, because you said, Hock, before the break, where anyone that comes on board, make it mandatory that you just don't. What are you doing in terms of greeniness, and are you adhering to certain standards that qualify and give you the tick for being green friendly, as it were? The healthcare at the moment in Pakistan, a few hospitals and so on have taken it on board themselves, and it feels like more as a sort of a individual initiative, as an organization or as an industry. For example, look at healthcare, that we are now looking to vendors who are adhering to certain green standards before we approve of them as our vendors. And at the moment, it seems like it's just I'm going to do it because I think it's important. And that's what's happening, isn't it? And it's for them that are doing it. It's an uphill task. It's an upstream swim. Is there a way of getting around that? How do we sort of incentivize that? Is there a way of incentivizing that?
Yeah, I think the first thing is to make sure, if you comply, you have access to funding, right? And that's what we are trying to facilitate. So it's important that once one showcase or one example is there, you'll find that everybody else will want to follow. So it's actually not that big of an uphill task. It's the biggest task is actually the first company or the first project who believes in this as the right way. And once you do that, everybody would want to come on and join you. So because I don't believe the industry would want to say we want to continue to do things the old way, right? Because we see the devastation that climate change has come to all of us, right?
Correct.
Not just Pakistan.
Maheen, how does then one access those funds?
So that's the $1 million question, right? But coming back to just green, right? How is it so hard to do green? It's not hard to do green. And like you said, you're doing it because you think it's important. But the reality is a lot of economics is driving you to do it. Look at your electricity bill, for one. It just makes sense to have solar rooftops, right? It makes sense for Pakistan, which imports whatever, 3 billion, 4 billion, $5 billion of oil annually, to replace some of that energy cost with renewable energy. We have an abundance of natural resource, whether it is water, so hydropower, solar, wind, and we can easily transform our energy sort of landscape, which is our biggest issue right now, is actually having that energy capacity. So we can transform that landscape into being much more dependent on renewables, which we have already resource available to us to do this, rather than constantly chasing oil and furnace oil and so on and so forth. We are a prime market for something like electric vehicles, which is the ultimate green, right? We have the ability to generate renewable energy and transform that into electric vehicle on our roads, thereby saving us pollution and saving us oil imports, which are always the starting and ending point for us on rupee weakness. Why does the rupee weaken so much? Oil prices go up, we have to pay more for energy needs, and so we are not able to sustain that. And so our dollar strengthens, and we end up, today we are sitting at 215, 216 to the dollar, right? Where a year ago we were at 150. So, these are all very real issues for Pakistan and for Pakistanis. And just adopting a green approach, whether it is on an individual level, on a business level, or on an industry level, those transformations can make a huge difference to the way we manage our energy and renewable financing. So,
And again, so then going back to the question, how does one gain access to that finance?
So how do you gain access to that finance? I think more and more now, even banks, institutions such as ourselves, Infrazamin, we are looking for projects to support that have that green element to them. So our starting point as Infrazamin is the project doing any environmental harm or damage? And it doesn't mean that if it is, that we won't do it. We will say, how can we mitigate that damage? How can we reduce that damage, right? So if there is a plant being set up and it uses furnace oil for energy, we can say, can we convert to renewable? Can we convert to solar? Can we use wind instead, right? So those are our building blocks. From there, we then take the project forward and we say, okay, is this something we can put our guarantee behind and enable a bank or a capital market instrument to finance it? So there are many means to avail, that financing. Even the banks have limits on green financing. They have actual state bank defined limits on they are supposed to do this amount of green financing. And it is not that impossible or that difficult to make a project green and avail that kind of financing, whether it is through an Infrazamin guarantee or through a bank lending or through any other mechanism out there.
I'm curious, is there a conversation happening between Infrazamin, the banks, and the political system? Is there that kind of conversation happening?
So the conversation between Infrazamin and the banks is always there, and they have been partners with us throughout our journey here, and we look forward to working more with them. In terms of policy and where the political angle comes in, so on the policy side, we are liaising with regulators to see how can we make certain regulations more efficient, make it easier for people to access financing either through us or through banks. And particularly what we really want to see is more and more companies come to bond markets, issuing bonds, green bonds, gender bonds, climate bonds, that would then bring that financing to the mainstream investor segment that we have in the capital markets, right? So it's about many areas. financing is not only banks. There's also equity players. Banks is just loans, right? It's just lending you against interest rate. There's also equity. There's also people that wish to invest in green infrastructure projects. So our parent company, in fact, which is a private infrastructure development group, is based out of the UK. It's funded by the UK government along with other European governments, and they do multiple equity investments in frontier markets that are considered green or that look to support green projects. So if you look at the way the world is shifted, ESG, green, climate finance, these are not just buzzwords.
Yeah.
There is a fair amount of capital being pushed into these thoughts as well, and a lot of money sitting behind some very large institutions. And all of them are looking for one thing. What's that green project we can support?
Achha.
And the more we shift our own mindset into thinking, okay, I want to do a project, I want to build a waste treatment plant, for example, or I want to build a road network. All you have to ask yourself, can I make it green? How can I make it green? Even small elements of it in terms of energy efficiency or reducing carbon emissions or reducing environmental damage in that area can qualify you as green.
There's a road network that comes to mind right now that's underway.
Yeah. So they are.
I wonder if they considered it or not.
Yes. So there are so many institutions internationally looking for those projects, and it is to our, I think, unfortunate that we've not been able to project those projects to the rest of the world community and said, look, here I am, here's a great project for you to support, here I'm building an energy efficient building, support me. And you just pitch yourself, market yourself, you can raise that financing. It's just about getting the story right.
Hock, what are you? Can you give us a little insight as to what InfraZamin is working on at the moment, or in the near sort of future?
Just going back to InfraZamin's foundational purpose, I think it's to address the infrastructure gap, right? Of course, with that, we started with digital infrastructure. We're looking at other forms of infrastructure, and then renewable energy is certainly quite clear in our focus, as well as trying to move industries along this path. And we're trying to get industries to make the investments to move into more renewable sources, as well as making their supply chains not only who they supply to, but who they buy from, greener.
Right.
And when we move things through the supply chain, then I think we can have the greatest impact for Pakistan. Not just one company, but through an industry.
Maheen Rehman, CEO of InfraZamin, and Khoo Hock, Chairman InfraZamin, joining us this morning. Now, so just want to touch on the what I think perhaps is now could possibly be a case study, the multi-net transaction. We're talking about green initiatives and as Hock said, applying green principles throughout the supply chain. Was that the case with this particular transaction?
Yes, so multinet checks the box in the sense it doesn't add carbon emission. It promotes digital access. So hence digital as itself as a technology is considered green, right? Because it reduces commute times or it enables access without having to travel and so things like that. So it's considered green in essence as a project. But with multinet, and I think with a lot of companies in Pakistan, they hit a certain barrier when it comes to future growth. They get to a certain point, which is they've grown a certain way and they're nice established businesses, but they can't seem to cross a if you like, a glass ceiling, if you like, in the corporate world. So what happens there is the reason they can't do that is not because they've got a bad business or they're not functioning right, is because institutional frameworks are important. Having a board of directors is important. Having transparency in your reporting frameworks is important. Having disclosures, having audit, having internal audit, all these things are important to give that company institutional sort of governance framework that makes it more palatable to bigger institutions, to lend to or to put equity in. So it's that framework which we also help create within Multinet. Not just that, but when we talk about ESG or we talk about green is a big component of ESG. Now within ESG there's several components. The other area that we also brought out was gender. Can we make Multinet, with all the expansion it's doing and all the jobs it's creating, 20% of those jobs by the definition of the transaction have to go to women. So thereby not
Okay.
only is employment created, but also employment for women, needs to be created. And then finally, when we talk about safety and health and safety, those are big components of being green or ESG as well. They're going to lay fiber in second tier, third tier cities of Pakistan. When they lay that fiber, we want to ensure that their workers are protected, their workers are safe. And so Multinet will actually engage a full-time consultant on the health and safety side to work with them throughout this fiber optic expansion. So you layer in green ESG in multiple ways, right? You evaluate, does the project cause harm to the environment? In this case, it did not. Right? In fact, it promotes digital access, which reduces the need to communicate by actually physically moving, right? Secondly, we've improved their governance structure, so we hit that mark as well. Thirdly, we look at their workforce. Can we push some women to work in a company like Multinet, etc.? So with all these aspects, we are not just looking at enabling the financing, but also enhancing the overall profile and the governance framework of the company, which in 2 years, 3 years' time, it will look like a very different institution.
Yeah.
And then be able to raise funds from much larger institutions because it has all those building blocks.
And
that those
Infrazamin
need.
then facilitates those sort of blocks. Correct? In a company like Multinet, for example. That makes it more viable for any future investors. Correct?
Yes, absolutely.
Well, we're nearly the end of this Green Hour. But do you, as an organization, as Infrazamin, have a timeline where you go, you know what, by X year, we should have a good sort of network of green, compliant organizations and institutions that are working in Pakistan?
Well, for me, as soon as possible.
Yeah.
Right? Because Mother Earth really needs all our efforts, right? And just to share the thought about green, there are two thoughts,
Yes.
right? When you go from black or brown to green, or you go from black or brown to a little greener each step. To my mind, there are certain processes or certain activities that today, with the technology we have, we can go black and brown directly to green.
In Pakistan?
In Pakistan, yeah, like you go to from a furnace to a solar rooftop solar, right? But of course there are activities, right? You know, smelters and big, heavy, energy-intensive activities that cannot make that transition immediately. Should we wait for those to be available and then deploy them maybe 10, 20 years later? Or should we start looking at steps to making them greener? To me, Mother Earth really does not have that 10, 20 years to wait.
Correct, right.
So I would say all hands on deck. Everyone has a role to play.
Yes.
It doesn't matter what industry you are. If you wake up and say, how much can I reduce my emissions? How much can I save the Earth today, Mother Earth today? We are at least taking steps in the right direction.
Yeah.
Right. So again, I leave this message: everyone has a role to play.
Yeah. That's infrazamin.com is the website. Maheen, Rehman, thank you very much. CEO Infrazamin. Hock, thank you very much. Chairman Infrazamin. This is the Green Hour. Remember, we'll be back with more Green Hour on FM91. Meanwhile, make sure you subscribe to the YouTube channel that is FM91. Thank you for joining us on the Green Hour.